I'm not the house of cards that falls down easily. I'm strong enough to handle what you throw at me.
Welcome to Mental Health News Radio. I'm your host, Kristen Sunanta Walker. Just what are we going to discuss? The intimacy that is mental health. Let's continue to make it as comfortable as discussing brain health or heart health. This show has been on the air for several years and we have amazing co-hosts. And then we created a network of podcasters on mentalhealthnewsradionetwork.com, a place where every possible facet of mental well-being can be talked about openly. My show, after several hundred interviews, the format is this: intimate, deep, funny, touching, sometimes uncomfortable, but always vulnerable conversations with interesting people. The goal is to have you, our listening family, many of you who have become my good friends, feel as though you are listening in on private conversations. Thank you for tuning in and becoming part of this amazing journey with me, and now with our network of podcasters. Just knowing this podcast might be helping any of you realize you are not alone on this journey called being a human being makes doing this podcast worth every second.
After all we promised, we'd be cordial.
Hey listeners, Kristen Walker here. I have a wonderful guest, a referral, and someone that I want to get into about what's going on in our world in terms of testing. She's going to tell us more about what that means. Her name is Victoria Frenkel, and she is with Top Lab. Victoria, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So just so we can kind of tease my listeners about what we're going to get into, tell them a little bit about your background and what you're doing now.
Sure. So I'm the CEO of a great lab called Top Lab. And right now our main focus is COVID testing, but we started out specializing specifically in toxicology, pathology, and chemistry.
And that means toxicology is many things, but also urine tests for drug treatment centers and so on, correct?
Correct. So we actually offer two different types of toxicology testing, one being oral fluid swabs, which is just swabs that go into your mouth. And basically after that, we test them and see if you are positive for any drugs. And then we also do urine toxicology, which is obviously urine tests. Gotcha.
So, you had a focus, just like the entire world went about March, some in January. My was in January. So as an organization doing this, you've got, your 5-year plan, you've got, your connections lined up, and then boom, COVID. What happened to your organization? Explain the steps in terms of what happened because of COVID.
Oh my God. We definitely did not expect to be going into the COVID world. Obviously, no one expected that.
Right.
With COVID, the test specifically that most people are doing, and what, mostly everyone, when they do COVID test, they're doing something called a molecular test. There's also antibody test, which is it's a chemistry test. It's blood. It's using serum. However, the popular one is COVID-19 PCR. So that is a molecular test. We definitely were not planning on getting into molecular. We were happy specializing in the field that we were specializing, and we wanted to be known as the best within what we're doing.
Right.
However, COVID kind of, turned life upside down for many people, and we just saw people struggling. We saw other labs struggling, neighborhoods, mayors, governors, the president, everyone just struggling. And we felt that, having a license as a laboratory, which is not easy to get, it's very, very difficult,
Yes.
and not doing our part for society was just wrong. So we had no choice. It was basically the right choice, and the only choice is to go into COVID-19 PCR testing.
So do you also do the antibodies test, or is it just the PCR testing?
We do the antibody testing. And I think that, my personal opinion is once there is an actual vaccine, that test will be very, very important. So as right now, it's not as popular as the COVID PCR test, but I think that, it will get very, very popular soon.
So how do people or is it organizations like hospitals and treatment centers and so on that come to you and request those lab tests, or can the general public come to you as well?
So it's everyone, the general public, hospitals, other laboratories. Surprisingly, other labs are swamped. You
Right.
buy an equipment, it can only do X amount of numbers of samples. And sometimes you can buy a second piece, but not everyone is so fortunate. They might not have the staff to run it. Or right now, it's very hard to even buy the equipment. Everything is back ordered.
Right.
So labs tend to send each other specimens. And then, a lot of the times the general public at this point is neglected. And we created a special concierge service specifically for the general public. It's people that are not going to doctors. They just want to know for themselves if they are COVID positive or negative. And if we can do it, we send someone over there, or they come to the lab and we help them out.
Can the general public also do the antibodies test?
Yes, definitely.
Do you mind sharing what it costs for the general public to do those tests?
Sure. You give me 1 second?
Yes.
Okay, hold on. I have to figure out how to say it to the general public so it doesn't sound too crazy.
Okay.
So for antibodies and for COVID PCR, both of them would be around $100.
Wow, that's definitely affordable. And you're located in New Jersey, so can people do this from anywhere, or do they have to be in New Jersey?
Actually, our license stretches out far and wide. So we have a bunch of different licenses for different states. So they could go to their doctor's office to do the swab themselves, or B, specifically in New York and New Jersey, we can send someone to their house and do a home draw. But if they are, let's say Florida or anywhere else or somewhere outside of the United States, they can go to a nearby laboratory and ask it to be shipped to us.
Okay, awesome. All right, and it's easy enough to call. I've done many a blood test and things like that at where you just go to a lab that's what they do, and it's not expensive. And then you bring in the information because they purchased the test from you, and then the lab knows to ship it directly to you, and then you get your results that way. Because one of the things I've found with the just influx of mental health issues that have come from COVID, the fear of getting it, the fear of what's happening in our world because of it, the after effects of having it, all those things. We've got a mental health crisis on our hands. And one of the things that is soothing to people that I've spoken with that are afraid they've got it or did have it is that antibodies test and also the COVID test. It's a huge relief, immediate pressure off of you if you know that you had it already, or if you have it currently. So is that what you're finding too?
Definitely. I mean, we do a lot of home draws, like I said, and when our tech goes out in the field and she goes to a patient's house or does it outside, curbside, a lot of the time, these clients, they basically tell us that they're terrified. Right now, where people are returning back to work, some people are ready to go. They don't care if there's COVID or any other disease lurking. They're ready. But then you have the people that are really terrified, and that is really affecting their psyche, their mental health. And we just want to be there and help society. I mean, we can't grow as a society, and we can't move forward past this, this virus if we're not doing our part. And so we'd love to help people out and give them a good state of mind.
Yeah, exactly. And I want to make sure, listeners, because I'm going to do this as well. I'm going to have a couple people in my family do this, go to a lab here where I live, get a swab, do a blood draw, and send it to Top Lab, just so, because there are a couple family members that we think had it in December because they got pneumonia out of the blue and had every one of those symptoms, but they couldn't get an antibodies test if you tried.
Right.
And the thing is, you don't know where to go. You want to go, okay, so we go to the drive, the ones where you can drive through. Last time we drove by that one where we are, it was probably 100 cars deep, and they ended up having to close it because people were waiting for 8 hours, and these brave lab workers are out there in PPE doing this stuff outside all day in the heat and humidity. And, they got to go home at some point to their own family.
I agree. And I mean, there's just also so much fraud going on. And it's, I fear that it's doing the opposite of helping people. It's giving people false sense of security. So when I say fraud, a lot of the times people are doing at-home kits, and they're buying them from unknown websites. So these kits are basically you're playing roulette. It's a gamble. They could tell you you're positive, you're negative. There's no scientific background on them. If you actually read the inserts, they usually say that they're 80% accurate, only tested on 20 people.
I mean, geez.
That's not that accurate if you really consider it. So I'm just concerned with, people doing all these kits. I think it's the best to do it in a licensed laboratory where we are, either we have an FDA approval or an EUA approval, but it's regulated. We are our regulation is very stringent. We are looked upon by New York State, New Jersey, the federal government. I mean, we make sure that our tests are safe, secure, and accurate. And if we don't, we won't have a license. So
right.
I think it's very important for people to be educated exactly on what test that they're taking.
Just like when you buy, every ad on Facebook, okay, buy this new mask with a pop-up face shield, and
right.
you get it and it's felt. And you're like, well, okay, if that gets wet, I'm actually making it worse for myself. I mean, it's ridiculous, the amount of stuff that crops up for you to buy to protect yourself. Or Anderson Cooper just had a man on. I don't know what company he's with. I probably blocked it out of my mind, but he was claiming that his company that makes pillows, have anti-COVID properties. I mean, there's so much fraud going on, and that just adds to, the constant fear and PTSD that's happening all over the place.
Definitely. I mean, people were doing the antibody test, which is IgG and IgM. They were doing it way before that I had the capabilities of doing it. How? Through all these tests where they just pricked a little bit of blood and they put it in a little droplet and they get a positive or negative. These tests are not accurate. We are doing serum. So it's whole blood is coming in, we're spinning it down, and then we are testing it. It's not a little trick.
That is fascinating to me, because I've had a few people that were also very ill about December, and they've done some of the tests you're talking about, and they were told, nope, you didn't have the antibodies. And I said, where did you get tested? Oh, it was something I found online. And then they went to an actual lab. Oh, yes, I did have it. So all of that adds to this lack of trust that already is going on. So I'm glad. I mean, when our mutual friend Dino has said we should talk, I thought this is really good. This is good information for people to know. Where do you go? Because that's the biggest thing when you're sitting at home. I mean, it's not like you're used to just calling up a lab and saying, hey, I want to get a test,
Right, definitely. You got to be educated. You got to know. You got to trust your doctors. The only thing is with the antibodies specifically, antibodies can disappear with COVID. So that's, we've seen that happen plenty of times. And that's why they say that when a vaccine comes, will have to do a booster shot. So this way, you boost again the antibodies. So later down the road, it's going to be very important to check your levels of antibodies.
So meaning that if you've had it, you need a booster shot in order to boost the antibodies that are already in your system but laying dormant?
At least that's what they're saying.
Okay.
I'm not, I don't know exactly what is going to come, what kind of vaccine, but, from the studies that I've read, that seems to be what's happening.
Okay, that makes sense. Okay, because you're right, it's two different scenarios, or I'm sure it's more than that, but I'm definitely not a scientist. Checking to see if someone has it as opposed to someone who might have already had it.
Right. So that's the beauty about antibody. But COVID tells you if you currently have it.
Right. Well, tell our listeners, as we round out our show today, tell our listeners, why the heck did you get into this business?
This is a good question. So I personally have a sister that's ill in mental health. She's schizophrenic. And for me, I personally had an understanding of, urine toxicology and toxicology in general was very near and dear to my heart because, she was an addict, very heavily into drugs. And it's possible that if we would have had her tested quite a few times, maybe we would have seen an issue and, she wouldn't have developed all her mental illnesses and as advanced as they are right now. So I had a love for that aspect for toxicology and the mental health, and then just helping people in general. And then when COVID came about, it wasn't even a thought in any of our minds to help society.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, thank you for sharing that. It's always up to a guest if they want to reveal personal, information, but my show is one of those ones where everybody does. So thanks for doing that. So Victoria, tell my listeners, where can they go to order the test and get that process going? What is your website?
Sure. They could go to toplabdirect.com and our phone number is there. And if they're antisocial and don't like speaking on the phone, they could even email us and we will contact them back within 24 hours.
Fantastic. Everyone, that's toplabdirect.com. I did this show on purpose. Because of the influx of questions and stress that I'm seeing. And, we're doing 80 shows on this network that are pumping out sometimes a show a day to a show a week to a show a month. That's a lot of content that gets pushed out of this network on a daily, weekly, monthly basis. And so we can see trends. And one of the major trends that we've seen is just this influx of PTSD and trauma around COVID. So knowing where and how to get a test is of supreme importance to us and obviously to Victoria Frenkel and toplabdirect.com. Victoria, thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me.
And listeners, thank you for tuning in to another episode of Mental Health News Radio.
Hi, listeners. I'll make it quick. These are some really cool places that give discounts and other cool things for listeners of Mental Health News Radio Network. If you want to get amazing help with healing from narcissistic abuse, go to healfromanarcissist.com. If you want CBD products that are the best of the best, I use them myself, go to proze.com and use the code mentalhealth20, mentalhealth20. If you want to get daily perk ups that help retrain your brain to think more positively, go to perkupdaily.com. And also, just because this one's fun, snarkycandles.com. I guarantee you'll love them. Snarky with a Y, SNARKY candles.com. And don't forget, if you want to hear all the shows on the network about first responders, you can go to firstrespondermentalhealthnetwork.com and all of our shows that focus on narcissistic abuse, narcissisticabusehealingnetwork.com. Thanks for listening and back to the show.
Sometimes I I'm passive aggressive, but never without good intentions. I heat up and act on my emotions.
Thanks so much for listening to Mental Health News Radio. Our podcast can be found on iTunes, Stitcher, and hundreds of other podcast apps, or you can visit our website at mentalhealthnewsradio.com. If you have a question or would like to be a guest, become a podcaster on our network, or join the amazing organizations that help keep us on the air, please email us at info@mhnrnetwork.com. Get ready for that special goodbye from our resident therapy dog, Miles, and a special thanks to Emily Sohn for letting us use her incredible song, Cordial, for our podcast music. Listen to the full song on SoundCloud at emily.sonne.
Don't be surprised when I don't hate on you. After all, we promised we'd be cordial. Sometimes in you I can fight it, but I'm opposing.
Good boy.